All right, so welcome everybody to our next panel. We're going to be talking about how you can use different social sciences, such as psychology, to help make your game better. That covers a wide range. So I personally got into games through psychology. So I've got a bachelor's and a master's in experimental psychology, and what I was doing originally was looking at the stereoscopic 3D computer graphics to find out if it was worth the additional cost. And so that was back whenever computer graphics were very expensive, and having stereoscopic made it even more so. So the Air Force was gracious enough to pay for my master's degree, and I got to do a lot of fun stuff back then. So my name's John Williamson. You guys probably remember me from some of the earlier panels. And here are our two associates.
Hi, I'm Lisa Brown. I'm an indie developer. Also, before I was an indie developer, I worked in AAA for a while. I was at Insomniac Games. I'm a graduate of Carnegie Mellon's Entertainment Technology Center, and I've also always been super interested in psychology and human behavior in games, although I do not have the formal training of my colleagues. It's something that I'm always really curious about and excited to see how to use it.
So I don't actually have any formal training.
You're making your own training.
My name is Jason Vandenberg. I'm creative director at Ubisoft, and my connection to psychology came from a couple of years ago, where I started doing some research on player motivation and stuff, and stumbled onto a bunch of science, and was like, wow, these facts are so much more useful than my opinions. This is really good stuff. I kind of got addicted to it, and gave a couple talks at GDC, and now
Isn't it part five?
Two, one, I don't know, a thing. The thing happened, that was fun. And now I do these things and talk about psychology, because I did a bunch of testing and to find correlations between a thing called a Big Five, this personality test called a Big Five, and what people want in their video games. And it turns out when you interview 150 people in restaurants and have them do a personality test and then take notes, that's called science. Which I had no idea, that's research, right? So that's my interest.
Actually, well, that seems like a great place to start. So what was the Big Five, and what did you learn?
The Big Five, right. So first, has anyone in this room heard of a thing called the Big Five, or OCEAN? It's also called OCEAN. 2, 3, 4, 5, excellent, cool. That shows you how wildly popular this test is, because people actually know its name. Big Five is about 20 years old. It's a test. It's about 300 questions long, and it's a free test. You can take it online. It's super cool. It's not one of those, BuzzFeed tests. It's like one of those with actual science. It was a response to what a lot of people in academia called sort of the cult of personality in research. People would be like, this is my cool model. And so what happened is a bunch of independent researchers got together and said, screw it, let's find a real survey that can map human motivation, human personality. And it worked really well. And that it started being used for things like validating people's job, are you fit for a job? Like if you apply for a job with the U.S. government, you take this test, and they'll say, oh, you're pretty good at this kind of thing, or this kind of thing, or this kind of thing, right? If you're familiar with the psychopath test, if anyone's heard of that, the psychopath test, you heard about that? Mm-hmm. It's cool, huh? That's the Big Five. Parts of that came from the Big Five. And so now it's been translated into 75 languages, and so and it has 5,000 white papers written behind it and stuff. So I thought, good enough for me, man, right? That sounds like science. Mm-hmm. So what I did with it was I gave people the test because it's free. So you take 300 questions, and it breaks down your personality into these 5 different groups, 5 different domains, and 6 facets each. So you get these 30 bars of this is your personality. And then I would say, okay, I have your test numbers. Tell me what games you like. And they would go, I like StarCraft, and I like Resident Evil, and I like World of Warcraft, and why, and we'd go into that, and I would look for correlations between those two things, and it turns out that if you take a personality test, it does a pretty good job of predicting what your favorite games will be. It will not predict all of the games that you will like, which is interesting. You can still like a game that's contrary to your personality test, right? But people's favorite games tend to line up pretty damn well with our personality test, which is cool.
And then there was like the one stat that didn't fit.
Yes.
The
Yes.
negativity one.
Yes. So
Right.
the big 5 is 5 because it has these 5 domains: openness to experience, which is like, do I like new things, or do I want things to stay the way they are? Conscientiousness, which is like, do I like hard things or do I like easy things, et cetera, et cetera. Stimulation and harmony, or agreeableness. That's what it's called. Agreeableness, right?
Well, they had to make it work with an ocean. so
Right.
they
It had to fit in
changed
the
it.
thing. But there was one called neuroticism, which measures do you experience negative emotion, basically. If you get a high score in neuroticism, it means that you react poorly, you get angry, like you're like, rah, fuck, that kind of thing, right? I got a 96 out of 100. It's pretty good. I was pegged that scale. It was pretty good, which is true. I'm much better now. I'm working on it. Turns out that one does not predict your favorite game. You would think that people would be like, oh, I have negative emotions. I'll want to play horror games. The problem that I found was that, or not want to play horror games, right? Like the other way around, right? You would think that would make sense. Turns out that there's no correlation at all. I had people with scores in the 90s who were like, my favorite game is Resident Evil, and I had people who with a score of 0 or 1 who were these like, yes, like what would a negative emotion feel like? It's an interesting experience, right? Who also favorite game Resident Evil. That was funny because he said, yeah, it's my favorite game because it actually scared me. Like, I didn't know what that felt like. So these 4 kind of predict your taste. And what neuroticism does is it tells us why people will quit. Rage quit is the experience of neuroticism. So it's a way of talking about it. Break your controller.
So did that data alter any of your game design subsequently?
Profoundly.
Mine too.
Yes.
See, I didn't do the research. I just watched Jason's talk and was like, oh, wow.
Yes.
I started doing a thing where I made my friends, I was like, hey, friends, take this personality test, no reason. So now I have all this data from my friends, and I want to like look at it and see like if I were to make a game for my friend, like what would that game be? But I think the biggest takeaway I took from your stuff was that like so often as designers, you're thinking through your own lens of like what you like and how you experience games, and it's very difficult to make games for someone who is not you if you don't understand why.
Right.
Like if you have to make a game that like you would never play, but you're like, well, people enjoy this. I don't understand why. It's like difficult to design for them because you can't always just make the games that you would play. I mean, I guess you could.
Yeah, you could.
But what's the fun in that?
Right.
So I think that model. There were models before that are kind of outdated. Like you might have heard like the Bartle test, stuff like that are around. They get brought up a lot, but they're kind of like put together based off of. I don't know how to describe like their litmus.
Yeah, the Bartle. If you guys, anyone heard of the Bartle test? Anyone here?
No.
Yes.
A couple.
Just a few people. Really important milestone in gaming history. Game developer named Richard Bartle, way back in the Stone Age, I believe, was when he actually did this. Ran a text MUD.
Does anyone remember?
Does anyone know what that
MUD
means?
It's like before MMOs had pictures.
Yeah, it's like it's an MMO, only it's typing, right? That's basically it, which is what we used to do before the invention of graphics. He ran a MUD, and he did a survey, just did a scientific survey, I think the very first one of its kind, on his players, and developed these 4 types, the socializer, the killer, the adventurer, and these 4 types of player types. And so these are
they're associated with like playing card decks.
Yeah, playing card types. And it stuck. It worked really well because it seemed to the Achiever, right? That was another one. It seemed to fit with people's expectations, right? What happened, I think, and we talk about it being outdated, kind of true, kind of not. That what happened was that Bartle published this study and said, my players who play text MUDs have these player types, and look, I have the science to back it up. The industry said, oh, there are 4 types of gamers.
Right.
Across the board, right? There are achievers and the socializers and that thing. In 2010, I think, or 2011, Bartle gave this talk at DICE, where he gets up at DICE on the stage and he's like, stop doing this. Okay? I never said there were 4 types of gamers, right? I said, my game has 4 types, and here's a theory to explain what I was seeing, but knock it off, right? So the model is still very useful, but I think I thought one of the interesting thing was that he pointed out is you should really be investing in creating a model of your players, right? We should be, instead of thinking about what's a universal model, which is...
Because that model in particular, it has relevance to things like MMOs where PvP is a thing or player interaction is a thing, but how do you apply that to like a single player game? It's just a different model of people.
Yep. And you asked how it had changed my design, and I want to reinforce what Lisa said, which is that I have started forcing my designers to play games that they hate. Basically, that's to break people out of their mold, because that's as a designer, if you want, or not just a designer, as a game developer, I think it's essential for you to get out of the mindset that you're right about what the best game is, right? Like that's one that's really hard to break. And as a consumer, as a player, that's part of the culture, right? Is fighting about what's the best game, right? It's fun, right? I like Dark Souls, well, I like the right, exactly. We have to break that habit, and so I would force people to go and play. What's your favorite? Oh, you play shooters? Great, go play Civilization. I'm like, this is the dumbest game ever. Okay, so it's not actually, right? And find out why, right? So that's the biggest thing, the thing that has really changed for me in looking at this is learning to expand my own ideas about what good means, right? To include all of the possible definitions of good, right? So that I can be sort of agile in thinking about, okay, who is this game? Who are we making this game for? What do they like, right? And then we'll sort of adapt based on that, and training other designers to do that.
And another, we're going to get on to another question eventually.
No, we won't. This is it.
But something, another way to look at it is realizing that like the aspects of your game can appeal to a range of people. Like it's not just like, well, this part, if this part serves people with this part of the personality aspect, is there a way that I can still serve these people over here? Like not just focusing on these line up with these line up with these, but like are there other things about your game that can still serve people of those other personality types? And that was a useful lens.
It's okay if people don't like everything in your game.
Right.
Well, and have you had the pleasure of an experience where somebody comes to you with a demographic and says, I want you to design a game to hit Q4 2017 with a E rating, but I want it to hit females age 45 to 70.
Yeah.
I have not had that experience. I did make a game for a specific audience once, but that was like, I'm going to make a game for like this person, which is much easier in many ways than doing a demographic. So.
Give them the test? And
Yes.
then, okay,
It
good.
says,
That's my
hang
design.
on, wait on.
I've done almost nothing but that. I've been making games for about 18 years, and I went from started working on my first game was the X-Files game, so that was fun. Way back in the day, again, CD-ROM adventure, words that still probably don't make any sense to you guys, but we had these things called CDs. And then Electronic Arts, Activision. I've been 6-7 years at Ubisoft, so pretty much every game I've had that conversation. So here's our target demographic. Here's what we would like to do. One of the things that I've been amazed by about my experience with the Big Five and some of the new models of personality is that when I present these models to my designers are often like, well, that model looks like it denies some of my personal opinions. And so it's wrong. So I'm not going to listen to you. Right? That's
Like you
usually
do.
the dev team response, right? That's me too, right? Whereas when you talk to the business and marketing team, and you say, hey, I have this model, and look, it has charts and personality and like demographics and stuff, they go, ooh, charts and graphs. we like charts and graphs. Is there science behind these charts and graphs? Yes, there is, in fact. Here's some science. And they go, oh, you are, this is amazing. I love these charts and graphs. Are you telling me that these charts and graphs are meaningful to a game designer? Yes, I am. Well,
If you can get them to listen.
if you, right.
That's
That's my job,
That's a
not
whole nother branch of psychology, is convincing,
Yeah, there is the
convincing your team to.
Game development
Yes.
psychology.
Yeah, because to get to your point, it is interesting that we as developers, the largest game group is now middle-aged females, and that is something that is outside of the way we grew up making games.
Right.
So trying to take advantage of that, you do need to have an opening to a different type of data and appreciation for different models to be able to reach that. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to grow.
Yeah, absolutely. We're finally in the place where we have huge different demographic groups that can support the whole entire industries, right? Who all want different things.
Yes.
Whereas in the earlier part of our development as an industry, right, we were pretty much focused on a very narrow demographic, right? We still have that focus, right? We still are serving that audience, but now we've opened up to being able to serve a lot of different people.
Ooh, I'm going to take over and ask a question.
Oh my God.
Because I have a question that I'm specifically curious about. So a lot of times these demographics are, age range, gender, maybe economic status. How does that correlate to the personalities? Because it doesn't seem like. Seems like
It kind of doesn't.
Yeah.
So what we find is there are. That's one of the things that's great about the Big Five is that they did all these studies, so you can look at how the Big Five varies across gender or nationality or age. You can see things like as you get older, you tend to become more conscientious, right? You become better at taking on hard tasks and better at controlling yourself, which. Duh, right? Like, spent $10,000 for that study. We're like, you get more, your self-control improves as you get older. Thanks.
But now you can say
now
that
it's a fact, right? Now it's a fact, yeah, exactly.
Make a chart over time.
That's true.
But when you look at the spread of like gender as an example, the deviation, like you look on the curve, is only like 5 to 10%, right? So you can't make very broad assertions about personality across gender. What you do see is really significant deviations in what we call context, right? Which is, do you have a full-time job? Are you in school? Do you have kids? Are you a full-time parent, right? That stuff tends to strongly influence whether you're playing on iOS, are you playing on your phone when because you've got 5 minutes, right? And you can only play when you're on the bus, or are you playing on PC because you're at home but you're in constant interruption mode? You're a parent, or are you someone who is working all day and then coming home to a large block of free time, so you have a big chunk of time, or you're working all day and then you don't have free time because you have a family, right? Those things really seem to have a much stronger effect on genre preference and style than the stuff we think that we expect would do it. And traditionally, the stuff like gender and age. There are some stats for that, for sure. There are some stats, but they seem to be much more strongly correlated with context than brain chemistry.
Yeah, for me it was always interesting because if you ask the largest demographic right now if they play games, the middle-aged mom would say no, I don't play games. But then you're like, well, what are you doing on your phone? Well, it's just Candy Crush or Farmville. It's like, well, that's
You mean the most successful video game in the industry right now? Oh, that one, right?
that one. That's not a game. So sometimes getting the data can be a little interesting in that respect.
Right. Right. Yes. Oh my God, you brought slides.
brought
She's
slides.
She's prepared. Prepared.
So there's just a lot of different ways to look at to glean out there to make your games better. So it can be from psychology, social psychology, behavioral design, behavioral economics, even the study of architecture can actually help you with your making your game. And so my favorite all-time example is the airport. So this is the airport. It's actually not the airport in Houston because there's actually slot machines in the corner. But this is the best photo I could find of an airport with luggage. And so the Houston airport redid their luggage and passenger throughput. And so they were able to get passengers from their plane to the baggage carousel in record time. And they got more complaints than any other airport in the US. And the problem was that the passengers were getting there so fast that their luggage wasn't there. And so everybody was extremely angry because they had nothing to do. So Houston, for once, did something smart, and they thought about the problem. If you've been to Houston, you know what I'm talking about. They didn't try to, they couldn't solve the problem by making the luggage get there any faster. So they solved the problem by what?
Slowing down people.
Yeah, so they made the people get there slower, and all of a sudden their satisfaction scores went through the roof. And that's simply because occupied time passes much more quickly than unoccupied time. And we see this all around us. So the lovely, although I have noticed in Harrisburg they actually work, but in most cities, the button at the traffic signal does not actually work. It's just there so you feel you have some sense of agency over it. The same thing with, because if the traffic actually did stop for pedestrians, then the traffic flow would actually come to a standstill, but it gives you something to do. The same thing with the front of the grocery store. Not only do they make a lot of money, anywhere from 10 to 20% of the revenue comes from those items there, but it gives you something to do while you're waiting to find out what the Kardashians have done while the person in front of you has more than 10 things, even though the sign says is there. So you're less likely to be angry. If they didn't have the Kardashian update, you'd probably be a lot more angry at that person. And so you can use these tricks, in game design. So my favorite example. Plants vs. Zombie. At the beginning of the game, there's really not much for you to do. There's no reason for you to have to actually click on the suns. They could just automatically accrue, but that mechanic is there solely so at the beginning of the game, you have enough things to do. So that's like one quick example of how you can use psychology to help make your games a little better.
Right. Right, and I think it points to a really key thing that is tough for even journeyman designers to get, which is that what you're focusing on is, am I having fun in my moment-to-moment experience, right? We so often design games that are fun if I could just get to the point where I'm playing the 20th or 30th minute, right, and see this interesting and intricate system and the beautiful elegance thing of the whole thing, right? But if I'm not enjoying myself from second to second, I won't get there, right? In fact, there was a guy I worked with at Electronic Arts who had this wonderful model for that, simple model, just a way of thinking about it. And it was that, he said there's second to second fun, there's minute to minute fun, there's hour to hour fun, and then of course it goes day to day, week to week, month to month, and even year to year, right? Right? And what's fascinating is each of these layers has very different rules about what kind of thing works and what kind of thing doesn't, right? Like the sun mechanic in Plants vs. Zombies is a perfect one. Hour to hour, right? I don't want to click that thing for an hour, right? I don't want to I'm just picking up the stuff for an hour. That doesn't make any sense, right? I want to have some meaningful sense of accomplishment. But if I just need something to do for the next 10 seconds while I'm waiting for the zombie to appear, right? Then oh, shiny, click.
Right.
Shiny, click, right? It's enough.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples, I guess, from this was thinking about loading screens because, it's like sometimes you're going to have to load and there's all these things you want to do to make the loading screen bearable. And very, very, very early on in Sunset Overdrive, when we were testing builds, we were like, oh, for these test builds, we'll put the controller layout on the loading screen so people will have something to read. And we also had a little loading icon that we called him Skull Buddy. He actually made it into the final game, but it's this little dancing skull. And that indicated that the game was loading. And then we did playtests, and up at Microsoft, they have all kinds of fancy stuff.
Right.
And they have eye tracking, right? To see where people's gaze is during the screen. So we were expecting, when the loading screen's up, we'll see where they look on the controller so we can see what they're reading and get all sorts of useful information. Every single person, loading screen goes up, they go straight to Skull Buddy. Because he's just sort of like, do, 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 and then boom, right there the whole time. So we're like, well, that didn't work.
Right.
But at the same time, that showed off that sometimes the solution can be quite simple.
Yes.
Sometimes you just need something interesting to look at for a couple of seconds.
It also raised, there's another layer in your list there, which is just pure biology. Right? The psychology and biology are really tightly connected. I mean, what you're talking about too is there's layers of perception even, right, that matter deeply in game design. We know that if I'm staring at the middle of the screen and something changes in my HUD, right, I want to tell the player, oh, status update, something happened, right? If they're looking here and you see it there and you change the color or you change the text or something appears, most people won't see it. is simply incapable of even seeing it. You need to move it. It needs to shake. Because we have a priority system in our brain, right? And the most important thing that our brain is looking for is movement, right? Which makes sense, right? Walking through the forest and it's, I need to see the thing, right? And so it's changes in movement are the most gripping, right? Followed by changes in color, right? Which then followed by, updates and shifts and these sorts of things. But you can end up in situations where again and again where designers are getting their playtest feedback and going like, why is no one seeing this? This HUD element is this big, it's on screen. Why are they not seeing this? I'm like, well, it's not moving,
Just
right?
wiggle it a little.
Yeah.
Just wiggle it a little. You just don't know much.
There's an XKCD, I don't know if you guys know XKCD, it's of course, online anyway. If you haven't read XKCD, do it, it's great. He did a one that shows the layout of the eye, where you can see color, right? And it turns out if you're looking at a screen like this, it's about this far from your face, the area where you can actually see color, not like detect differences and changes, but where you're actually seeing color is that big. It's right there. That's the color. Now, I understand what you're thinking right now. You're looking down here and you're seeing this is white and we've got brown here and you're seeing all of that. What I'm telling you is that's all imaginary. Okay? Your brain is filling that in for you. Your eyes can't see that color. Like if you're looking at me, you can't, the color on the side there up here is not visible. And so if I change the color up there and you're looking at me, you won't see it.
They didn't, I remember they did an eye tracking, I don't know if it was a study or if it was just a game to mess with people, but they...
Is there a difference there?
They did an eye tracker game where there was various bits of text on the screen and they're just reading a paragraph on the screen. It would track where the eye was, and then when the eye was over here, it would like change a word over here.
Oh my God.
And so when they
That's so
reread
evil.
it, people would just be like, but I swear I remember this story. But they didn't notice because they're reading over here. But,
Oh, that's fantastic.
but this whole talk brings up another thing, which is like biometrics as a thing. And as a scrappy indie now, like I don't necessarily have access to, that was a nice thing about AAA, right? You have access to those resources about biometrics and test data. But I do have an eye tracker.
Really?
Yeah, like a consumer grade eye tracker. So I've been thinking about, at first I was like, I want to make games with this eye tracker, but now I'm sort of like, I want to make like my own biometrics detection for the game I'm working on for the eye tracker, which is like, I'm working on this game and now I'm like, I want to work on this tool that will like give me this much back to this game, but it's a
Don't do
thing.
that. Don't work on the tool.
I know, but I want
bad.
to.
Work on the game.
But I want to. Oh.
Work on the game.
All right.
Don't distract yourself with the tool. Work on the game.
Sounds like you have that experience with some sort of pain to go along with it.
Oh God. Sometimes we get distracted on building cool technology and forget about
shiny thing in the
making
corner.
cool games. Yeah, sometimes it happens. Anyway.
Do I think you feel comfortable talking about color theory and why we see certain colors primary and how they're changed distances?
Wow, that's
Or like
outside of my
how
sphere.
much is cultural and how much is biological.
Do you know about that stuff?
Not enough. I was hoping more you did. But there is there are some data that shows that we always see red as the foreground and anything blue in the background. And so if you're designing a UI, you can look at some of that. There's a lot of two-dimensional vision cues that we have. Haze, is a big one. If you want something to look like it's far away, you can make it kind of hazy and blurry.
Yep.
There's a lot of data on that.
Yep.
And that was a horrible segue.
Segue to.
That's
all right. We can just change topics.
Oh yeah.
So going back to waiting, Disney has mastered the
Oh yeah.
joy of waiting in line. So in this little screenshot right here, there's probably, I think there's 6 different things that they're doing to make you happier when you get to the end of the line. Anyone want to take a guess at a couple of them? Yes. That most of the time is a good one, yes.
Their actual reward.
Yes. Exactly, yes. That is a huge one. You're looking at your watch, it's like, I'm not going to get there till 4 o'clock. You get there at 3:30, you are extremely happy. You feel special. You feel like you got lucky. They lie to you.
And you thank them for it.
Yeah, and you thank them for it. They also never show you the end of the line. The line is always going to be curvy back and forth. They try to keep you occupied because if you see a long line, you're less likely to stand in it, even if they tell you the time is shorter, just because it looks like it's a long line. But if they hide the actual distance, you don't really quite get that. I haven't found a good way to use this in a game yet, but it's just an interesting way to do it. You no longer have to wait in lobbies that long anymore to play a game.
Well, we see that sometimes in the way that people respond to community challenges. I think there's, I guess I don't know if you guys are familiar with the mechanic, but sometimes games will say, "Hey, everybody's playing this game. Play 10,000 games in the next 24 hours, and you'll get something cool." Right? Or play 1,000,000 matches of Halo, right? And you'll get the right. Sometimes we do that, and that seems to work for some people, and it does kind of has this interesting social effect, right? In terms of social psychology, where it can create groups that are like, oh, okay, we're going to band together and do that. But it has that same effect of like, 1,000,000, what?
Million.
You play a match and you're like, okay, I did it, and now whoa, too many to left, right? You can't feel that sense of progress moving forward, and it's the same kind of thing, right? People will abandon, they'll lose interest. They'll tell themselves, if you stare at that very slow progressing status bar that I don't have any sense of agency over for long enough, you're gonna go, you know what, I don't even care, right? It's like, that's other people who are playing that, right? That's not my thing. And so we look at ways to solve that by doing things like giving you local challenges. Like instead of saying, hey, everyone play 10 million matches, we say, hey, you play 5 today, and then you get the badge, and then we're collecting 1,000,000 badges, right? You have your local thing that you do, and that's cool. And then you did that part, and it works better. Right now, you feel like you're participating in something, and you feel better about the vastness of the thing.
In a single player context, I think with the weighting, you can sort of tie it to things based with your economy, like how many X do you need to level up, or how many of these ingredients do you need to make this thing? And oftentimes sometimes it's visual, like how they present the progress, like if you can show it in such a way that when you do a task, a big chunk gets taken up instead of like a little like bloop, then it feels like you're making headway, or making an economy, like a crafting economy, such that maybe you need this many to make this thing, and you need this many things to make this thing, rather than like you need a bazillion things to make the thing. Yeah. You have like short-term goals, and that's just a way of making it more bearable.
Wasn't there a famous? There was a quest in the early World of Warcraft in the
the
Barrens.
Stranglethorn.
Yeah, the Stranglethorn. Yeah, the tusks.
I was thinking about the one where you had to get the pages. And
Whoa, we just went nerd there. That was really sorry.
Vanilla WoW had a lot of that.
Might have played some time, a little bit on that one.
Sorry.
But anyway, it was this quest where it was like, all the quests are always go get 20 of these, go get 40 of these, and there was this one where it was like go get 300 of these things. And you go kill the first mob, and it doesn't drop. And you go, wait a minute. Hold on a minute. I don't get one for every kill, and I need to have 3. What? You kill and you get one. Like, wait a sec. And so a lot of people just wouldn't do it, right? It would just that one quest just would end up not being done for no good reason, right? Just because psychologically it was a barrier to people, sort of an impediment. They'd have to come up with strategies. What's weird, though, is that you'll see that there's an achiever players, so players with a high drive for achievement, will actually reverse on stuff like that, because they'll come up with their own strategies, right? They'll be like, no, I like, oh, that's hard? That means that normal people can't do it. And I'm not normal. Right? And so you create these, and honestly, the whole sort of hardcore Dark Souls genre, which I might love, is based on that whole thing, right? Based on that whole idea of, oh, it's really hard. Oh, okay, I'm into that, right? So all of these psychology things always have places where there's people who flip both ways, right? Oh God, what's going on back there? It's okay. They're stealing our people. We don't know. Are they bringing more in? We don't know.
So some of the other interesting things have come up, just with free to play.
Oh yeah.
Just how bad people are at math.
Oh, free is weird.
And Just how different ways to take advantage of that. We don't have to spend too much time on this one, but it is an interesting use of data and psychology.
Free is so weird. Free is so weird. There was this wonderful test done. It was a study that was done using chocolate in shopping malls. They set out plates of chocolate, and one tray. They started out with one tray being 10 cents, and the other tray being 9 cents. And they just left them out there, and they had little thing, and then they would just count the number of people that would, buy each one. They left it there for a certain period of time, and then they would come back, and they came back the next day, and they shifted it so that this one was 1 cent, and this one was free. And the shift in the 9 cent, 10 cent version, it was kind of like, not much difference, right? The 10 cent was a little bit less popular than the 9 cent one, right? But when we went from 1 cent to free, pretty much nobody was spending, right, the 1 cent, and everyone was going for the free one because it's free, right? Even though it's exactly the same amount of savings, right? And you see that again and again and again. Free means something really important to humans, right? We respond to that in a way that has nothing to do with the cash part, right? Which is fascinating.
Yeah, which is the problem with monetization right now and trying to survive as a developer. It may not, when you think about it logically, there's not much difference between 99 cents and free compared to the hours of entertainment you're getting. But as a developer, nobody's actually spending that 99 cents. So,
Right. Yep. There was another fascinating piece of data. Something like of the iOS games that are installed on people's phones, of the 99 cents, so they have 99 cent games on iOS, right? There's a huge number of games out there that are 99 cents. Something like 60% of the ones that are installed on people's phones are hacked versions.
Have a 99-cent game.
Wow, like that is a devotion to, I'm not going to spend anything. I'm not going to spend a single thing, right? Which, again, it's easy for us to make fun of that, but it's also true, right? It's human. There's something human about that. No, I don't want to giving you something in return for something else is a totally different exchange than I get something for free, and we'll go out of our way to avoid that. My wife and I, when we play. Do I admit this publicly?
Do it.
Settlers Online, which is a free-to-play version of Settlers. Oh my God, that I love so much. Oh wow.
A game that breaks apart families.
Yes. And I'm a whale, so I pay, right? Which is weird because I work for Ubisoft, so why am I paying for the game? But I do. And she's like, no, I will not pay a cent. Right? We put the same number of hours in it, right? And she's gotten same distance and stuff, but she's like, I've done it for free. I'm like,
I noticed something about my own habits.
It's better. I know it's better.
Like I was playing, bubble games for a while, and when Facebook games were a thing, and I wouldn't pay for anything, but I would buy gifts for my aunt because I knew my aunt was super into Bubble Witch Saga, and I'd play through, and the only money I ever spent on free-to-play games was buying gifts for her, which is. And I don't know if there's any studies to show how people will be more willing to spend money as a gift for someone else.
There was a fascinating talk that was given. If you're interested in this topic, you guys know Congregate? Congregate, the website, the PC website that has all the Flash games, right? It's amazing. Yeah, it's good stuff. Congregate a couple years ago at the GDC gave a talk on what was working on their website, and they talked about the games that were monetizing and succeeding at being successful. And they had this chart, and they talked about how most games weren't doing very much, but when they had this particular combination of elements in it, they would blow up. And the combination of elements was if it was a competitive game where people were competing with each other in groups, so it's a sort of a massive group game, that also included clans, so that people could gather together and self-identify and say, I'm in this clan and you're in that clan, and now we're competing with each other. And then you offered the players the ability to buy boosts for your clanmates that helped your clanmates. They saw an explosion in monetization with very, very little negative backlash from the community because everyone tends to agree if I want to spend $5 helping my clanmates win this thing, that's okay. Like, that's all right. But if I spend $5 to make my chances better, that's not okay, right? That's not cool. Yeah, it's cheating, exactly. So we don't have numbers. I don't know of numbers that say what the actual rollover is, but I do know that that's like, I thought it was like 60% of the money that was being made was coming out of that particular combination of mechanics. It was like this, and there was their point of their talk is, hey guys, here's this thing that people really like to do.
Right.
Right? We call it the aura effect, right? If I'm spending money and it's helping everybody, that's okay.
I would want to point out, though, that that is also a cultural thing.
Yes,
Because
that's
in our cultures, like in America, the thought of paying to win is like
It's a sin.
It's disdainful.
It's a
like,
crime.
oh, it's like a crime. But that's not universal.
No.
Like in other places, it's very accepted that, oh, that person has the money,
So they should.
so they should. And that led me to think about something related to psychology, which is that
Which is the topic, I
you
guess.
have to remember that a lot of psychological studies are done on American, like, student, middle-aged, educated people, white people from like this certain age range,
Sure.
and because that's who, when people are doing studies, that's who is available to test on.
It's you guys, it's students.
So even with all of this data, like there's still a big factor to consider, especially when you think about games coming up, how it's a global market and how a lot of emerging territories are developing huge game scenes. It's something to keep in the back of your mind about, these are what the studies have shown, but these are who the studies tested, so it's.
Yeah, there are some, very large, distinct, regional and international differences. So, some of the games I've done were in Hungary, and they, coming from the Soviet bloc, they like very hardcore, very deep, intricate games, and trying to convince them to help me make a more casual game for America was a little bit of an uphill climb. And then working with teams in China, it was again different. It was more like, where are mechanics that we can borrow from versus where is something we can innovate on and make stand out.
Right. Yeah, we see that at Ubisoft, since I'm a fan of Settlers, as I mentioned, Settlers, if you don't know, is a sort of economic simulator game. And that when you look at the success of that game and how many servers they have, right, by region, it's like there's 2 in the States, and there's 1 in England, and then there's like a Spanish one, and then there's like a Russian one. There's a couple that are in Brazil, and then there's 14 in Germany. And then right, because Germans are like, oh, an economic simulator? Hell yes! Like, right? They just yeah, exactly. They love that, right? And it's weird, right? You see that stuff, but it's a really important factor in understanding, because where your game can succeed, right, is a really big factor in knowing, what you're going to do with it.
Yeah, definitely is. Yeah, so go back to the free to play. There's all sorts of tricks that they're playing with us, and the fact that we're just horrible at math. And one of the ones that shows up again and again, the next time you guys go eat at a nice restaurant, if you look at the menu, odds are it won't have a $sign. They might not even have it numeric. They might spell out the word $17 for the plate of bread or the salad. And they do that in part because people have shown over and over again, if there's a $sign attached to it, you will actually think that's real money. But if there isn't a $sign, you're like, well, it's not exactly money. That's why most free-to-play games have that soft currency, so you get lost in that conversion of I bought 1,000 gems for $23.19, so each gem is worth forget it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Whatever.
1,000. Look how many I got.
Yeah.
Which is
1,000.
This is where we start to get into the distinction of like game design for evil. Start to drift over into the line between.
So we won't spend too much time on that, because I'm sure none of us actually enjoy it. It is interesting, but
it's fascinating.
It has changed. It's gone from, I want to make a game I enjoy, to I want to make a game that this small focus group also enjoys, to a larger focus group with some beta testers, to some data, to now all I'm doing is looking at an analytics page going, well, why did people stop playing 10% at day 3? So
one of the things that to touch on that, actually why I think when we say game design for evil, yeah, it's not great, but also we are starting to see the other part, the other psychological effect of this kind of game design, because while individually in the moment, I may go, oh, I'm not going to think about that as hard and be willing to spend a little bit more money. The thing that kind of analysis often overlooks is that I have a memory, and I have friends, right? Mm-hmm. And we talk about the experience, and so what we're seeing now is this sort of collective discussion among the players around that kind of thing, right? Monetization and free to play, and the practices of that industry, right? Of our industry, and what we're doing, the things that we're experimenting with. And you see over time the group psychology rejecting stuff that individuals will be triggered by, right? And I think that's also, you were talking about the behavioral economics and the way that group psychology works. It's not as simple as I try to remind my designers, human beings are not vending machines, right? You don't just push the button and then get the thing response, right? They remember what button you pushed, and that context is carried out into a social context, and so it's not free, right? It's not free. When you manipulate people like that, they remember, right? And sometimes it's okay. Like I said, I'm a whale. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, manipulate me, man. That's good. Sure, if I like your game, I'm gonna pay for it, right? I don't care, right? I'm like, here you go, take it, $100, sure, why not, right? Which my wife doesn't appreciate, but she's very patient, very patient. Anyway, so it's even there we get into this multi-layered, like, oh, there's no right solution.
Yeah, it is interesting. You see different ways that it shows up. For example, we all know that $4.99 is $500, but there's a reason why everything ends in 99, and because they've shown time and time again, if you have that 99 or 95, people don't round up when they do the math, and they spend more. Right. On average of 13 to 18% more. So that's why everything's there. You may say, I know that's $500, but you really don't.
You don't really.
So yeah, it's interesting the way that they try to do that. The other one that shows up a lot are this one's in almost every NBA book now, but I have yet to find the actual story, so it may be apocryphal. But the story goes that Williams and Sonoma had this bread maker, and it was whatever the price is, $300, and nobody was buying the bread maker because nobody just bought it. So what they did to try to solve that problem was come out with a $400 bread maker, well, probably $3.99 bread maker. And then all of a sudden, the price for the lower priced bread maker, the sales started to explode. And that was because there was nothing to compare it to, so you didn't know if it was a bargain or not. Mm-hmm. And so you'll also see that with a lot of items, especially in free-to-play. There's no free-to-play where you go and there's only an option to buy 500 gold. There'll be an option to buy 100 gold, 500, 1,000, 10,000, and they'll have that there on purpose so that something seems like an actual value to get you to try to spend that money.
Outside of free-to-play, there's also the flip side, which is, it's true in a lot of like smaller indie games, which is charging too low makes people assume your game's going to be crap. Right. So charging more, it'll actually improve the sales.
In some cases.
In some cases, it's pretty specific. But it made me think of, was it like Martha Stewart or something with the pies? She got her start selling pies and no one was buying her pies. So she made them like twice as expensive. And that was the only thing she changed. And then everyone's buying the pies because they're like, oh, these must be really good pies because they're so pricey. So there is a flip side to that, although it's a different sort of market and angle.
I think what we're talking about here is I think it's referred to as the artisan factor, because what you most commonly see this kind of sort of psychology when you're dealing with another example is artisan jewelry that people make, right? If you people who time and time again people will do their artisan jewelry or they'll do their paintings, right? They'll make paintings, they'll do arts and craft stuff, and then because they're sort of insecure about what they're doing and they're not sure about what the value is going to be, they'll be like, oh, it's $10. Right, here's $10 for this necklace that I made, and that none of them sell, right? And there's time and time again you see situations where you see that you take that $10 one, and now it's $150, and suddenly they sell like crazy because people feel like it's more valuable because the price is higher, right? What's weird about that is that it raises this bizarre question, right? You don't have to buy the necklace, right? It's not required. Yeah. So if the person buying it feels it's more valuable because they're spending more money, is that better? Is that acceptable? Or are they being exploited?
It's like the same,
Tricky,
the
right?
same morality on the other side.
Tricky, right?
Right.
Anyway.
As an artisan, you have to eat. But yeah, you'll see that in every free-to-play game,
Yes.
we'll play
There
around
it
with
is.
that. So
There
having
it
the
is.
multiple price points, explain exactly how much you're getting off, because you're bad at math. This is one of my other favorite studies, which actually seems to work out well with the way we create our textures, which is they ask people which of these two ladies is more attractive. And it's a little hard to tell in this version. But the one that they pick is the one that's actually perfectly symmetrical. And then when they do a different version of the study where they ask, again, on this kind of hard to see which of these two models is more attractive, and this one is the one whose pupils are dilated more. So the one on your right over there. And so they've also then done a study as far as what's the most beautiful person of any ethnic group or any continent. And we all think that it's going to be the most striking person, but it actually ends up being literally the most average person. So they'll take thousands of photos, average them together, and then put that one in there with the other ones and have people rank which one is the most attractive. And no matter which culture you use, it's always the most average person, whether it's male or female. So it's kind of interesting that we think, I want to make somebody striking, and so we actually end up going for actually what's the most plain. And so that works out well, though, for game design, because it's really easy to make a symmetrical texture. And then to make somebody with nice big blue eyes, you're definitely going to come across as more attractive. And the theory on why blue eyes and why big pupils are attractive is that we were actually able to get a better feeling for the mental state of the person, whether they're upset or angry or aroused by having that. And then so, but some ways you don't really want to be perfectly symmetrical. Starting to add in a beauty mark, which is a way to make them slightly less symmetrical, but not overly symmetrical, is a way to add a little bit more distinction. And yes, Marilyn Monroe does have two different beauty marks because she changed where the location was over the years as a way to try to drive that home. And then so if you wanted to create an anti-hero, whether it's a villain or an anti-hero, based on the fact that now you know everything should be symmetrical, what's a really easy way as a designer to make something sort of an anti-hero? Yeah, so a really easy way is just to make them asymmetrical. That's probably one of the easiest ways. If you're working on an indie team and you want to try to make somebody evil, that's an easy way to go about doing that. I mean, of course, there are exceptions, but we don't have to get into that. Well, actually, those are the exceptions. We'll end with one last study, which is my personal favorite, because I still want to implement this in a game design. And this was a study that you wouldn't be allowed to do today for a lot of reasons. This took place in Oregon, and there's a long rope bridge. And the rope bridge is over a huge valley, and it sways back and forth in the wind. And so it's kind of not really traumatic, but it's definitely intense walking across it with the wind howling and all the sound below. And so the study was that they would have a young lady go up to young men before they cross the bridge and flirt with them and try to give them her phone number. And then they would have the same woman in the middle of the bridge doing the same experiment, flirting with men, and try to give them her phone number. And then the data was they were trying to call back, which men would call back, the ones in the middle of the bridge or the ones at the beginning of the bridge. And so it ended up being that on almost a 2-to-1 ratio, the men in the middle of the bridge were the ones most likely to call her back. And when asked, when asked to give a verbal description, were more likely to say that she was more attractive. And so the theory on that one was a misappropriation of arousal. So they were on the swinging bridge. They had a lot of extra emotions. They didn't know where else to attribute it to, and they attributed it to her. So it'd be interesting. The one I keep wanting to try on this is in my app games. Is the minute I do something really awesome and epic, that's when I want that screen to pop up to say, rate this game.
Yeah.
And say, yes, 5 stars.
This reminds me of, there's a conference called Gravity Free. It's a design conference, but it's like all types of design, like industrial design, like graphic design, all sorts of design. And I watched a talk from it once there was a guy who, he was like a blacksmith by trade, but he designed equipment for presenting food in really high-end fancy restaurants that needed very specific ways of presenting food, like, oh, you get the little thing and it has to come out at this temperature, so make a bowl that will like retain the temperature and such. But he tried a bunch of different things, and one thing he did was for certain foods that were very small but very expensive, they're like super elaborate, but they're small little morsels. He made this thing where he made a spike, and the food was on the end of the spike, and how you ate it was you went up and you like bit it off the spike. And the thing he found from that, or why he did that, was that things that are uncomfortable can cause you to focus, because he really wanted people to really focus on the experience of eating this food, because there wasn't that much of it and it was really expensive. And so that uncomfortable situation made them like zoom, like really focus on what was going on. And that was an insight to me, because I had never thought of like danger or fear or an uncomfortable situation as a way of getting someone to focus on something. But I was discussing this with my friend, and he was like, oh, there's something that does every day, and it's like when you're talking to someone, you put your hand on their shoulder, especially in a business context or something, just like casually put your hand on their shoulder, because that is slightly uncomfortable, and it gets people to focus on exactly what you're saying. So I don't know, stuff like that is pretty exciting to me.
Just two more real quick points. So on, a lot of times the way you present stuff, so if you go back and look at film, if you present things versus left to right versus right to left, that's a great thing to look at. And then one last one, sunken cost. This one is interesting because if you're given two sets of things in this experiment at the mall, people would always go for the smaller stack of cookies because there must be something wrong with the bigger stack of cookies. So you'll see this a lot when free-to-play trying to create some sort of scarcity, but there's no reason a digital item should be scarce at all, because you just Control-C, Control-V. And then this will be the very last one, and then I guess we'll have time to take maybe one or two quick questions. But if you've ever had that experience where you're downstairs and you're like, I need to go get the thing upstairs, and the minute you go into the room, you're like, why did I come here? I can't remember where I'm supposed to get. So that actually works, because you actually segment your life into these discrete compartments. But not only does it work in the real world, it's been shown to work in the virtual world. So whether it's virtual reality or a first-person shooter, or even to some extent some of the 2D games. So in some of my shooter games, whenever you would have to go through a room, we would actually try to find some way to remind you of the objective, so you wouldn't have to hit and go back or do something a little bit more overt, because people tend to forget whenever they change that. So,
Right.
So I guess we'll take one or two quick questions, and it looks like we're supposed to shut down for the next talk.
Which I think is you, right?
I think so. Oh, God. Yes.
So is that like second to second, minute to minute? You're talking about the whole progression of that. Does that come into play? I'm interested with For Honors. Sorry.
Does that come into play with like For Honor's combat system?
No.
Not at all, totally.
Not at all, no. So he's talking about the game I'm working on right now, which was announced at E3 last year, is For Honor. So you can say that sort of type of thinking applies to literally every game ever made, right? And so the reason it's one of these things that game developers who've worked for when you accumulate a certain number of years of experience, it's one of those things that everyone kind of knows about, right? You know that we need to think about long-term fun and systems that are interesting and fun to get into. But if we don't think about just pure second-to-second cool stuff, if I don't think about just cool minute-to-minute rewards, like why am I playing for the next 60 seconds? Like what am I trying to accomplish in the next 60 seconds, right? It's not a question we're really used to asking ourselves as players, right? As players, when we talk about game, we talk about like, oh, it was cool when I finished that quest, right? But that's an hour-to-hour thing, right? That's like, it's going out there for the so that's what we talk about. That's what our conversations are about. We don't talk about, oh yeah, it was cool when I got that +1 to my score, right? Because then I was able to accumulate enough of those +1s to be able to take the point or whatever, right? Like we don't think about it, we don't talk about it in those terms, and so we're kind of blind to it. So I think as game designers, of course it does apply to the game. The way that it applies in terms of development is that we're just constantly training ourselves to go and look at those spots that are blind spots for us that we don't normally think about being the game, right?
I think that was more like central to the question. Since as a gamer, those are subconscious things.
Yeah.
How, as a designer, do you get the mentality of having to bring those to the forefront and analyze them?
So it honestly, the best advice I have on this one is play games you hate. Play games that are good, that other people really love, that are super, super popular, but that you don't like at all, that you wouldn't normally play. Because what that'll do is it'll put you in a state where you're not being distracted by your own pleasure, right? And so you kind of get out of that, and you got to do something with your time, right? Put in at least an hour, right? An hour or two, right? Put in and think about it, and then try and figure out, why is this working, right? Why does this work for other people? Because if there's 5, 10, 15 million people playing this game, it can't be terrible, right? So that's one way. Also, just study. You just need to just learn and read.
There's lots of great theories now, and another great easy way to do it with your own game is just give your game to somebody
Yeah,
else,
play test.
and then step back. And anytime you want to go forward or you're clawing at your thighs,
Just write it
that's
down.
when you need to make a change.
Take a note.
You'll be able to sense that person is not having as much fun as you thought they were going to be. I guess we should probably call that done. We're a little
Are we
over.
done?
Are we
We're
over?
over? Damn it.
That means you have like less time.
I've got to go. All I'm going to do is talk now. Do a thing. Thanks,
Yes.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.